My sister's lies destroyed my engagement and my relationship with my family. Now, 2 years later, the truth has come out, and they want to reconcile. But after so much betrayal, I'm unsure if I can ever forgive them. I was 21 when my fiancé proposed. He was truly the light of my life. We'd known each other since preschool, and our families were incredibly close. He'd often join us for dinner, and we'd spend time at each other's houses constantly. He didn't have siblings, but I have 2 older sisters, which mattered because he was also really close to them. We grew up side by side, and when we finally started dating, I don't think our parents stopped celebrating for weeks. He helped me through a lot of my anxiety, and even when I put on a bit of weight and my mom warned me that he'd leave me, he stood up for me. He told her that he loved me for who I was, not for how I looked. In fact, he always said I was the most beautiful woman in the world to him. We were only engaged for 6 months when the incident happened. My middle sister, let's call her Nikki, was always a distant person, cold really. She rarely showed affection and only seemed to open up to my fiancé, saying he was like a brother to her. He had helped her through some tough times, like her struggles with addiction and legal trouble. Nikki and I never saw eye to eye. I loved her because she was my sister, but I didn't particularly like her as a person. Out of nowhere, Nikki suggested we go clubbing, saying she felt bad for being so detached and wanted to spend more time with me. I agreed, though clubbing wasn't really my thing. After a few drinks, I loosened up and started having a good time. Things were going well until Nikki spotted a guy she was interested in. She said she wanted to climb him like a tree, but after a few minutes of talking to him, she came back with a sour look. I asked her what happened, but she stayed quiet until I pressed. Finally, she said that the guy wasn't interested in her. He wanted my number instead. I tried to reassure her, saying he wasn't worth it, and that plenty of guys would love to be with someone like her. But she wouldn't let it go. She claimed she needed to use the restroom, and then we'd head home. I waited for over an hour, sipping on more cocktails, when I began to feel dizzy and lightheaded. Assuming Nikki had left, I decided to call a cab. On my way out, I ran into one of Nikki's old flings. He offered to help me get to my car, but I told him I was taking a cab. He suggested we share one since he was leaving too. I agreed and we headed out together. I tried to find my phone in my purse, but the dizziness got worse. The next thing I knew, I blacked out. When I came to, I found myself on a hard couch with a pounding headache. I realized I was at Nikki's friend's place and my phone dead was on the table. When he noticed I was awake, he explained that I passed out in the cab, and since he didn't know my parents' address, he brought me here to let me sleep it off. I told him I needed to get home because my fiancé would be worried. He called a cab and I left. When I arrived at my parents' house, I was met by my mom, dad, Nikki, my fiancé, and his parents, all gathered in the living room. I thought they were concerned about me, but before I could say a word, my fiancé demanded to know how I could betray him like that. I was confused. Why would he think I had cheated? I tried to explain what happened, but I kept getting cut off. Nikki jumped in, calling me a liar and accusing me of flirting with guys all night. She claimed she had seen me leave with her friend and showed a photo of him with his hand on my back as we exited the club. I hadn't even noticed that in my drunken state, but the photo looked bad. My fiancé was furious, shouting while our moms were in tears. I asked Nikki to call her friend so he could clear things up, but when she did, he told a completely different story. He claimed I had begged him to take me back to his place, and we slept together multiple times. I was devastated, realizing Nikki had orchestrated everything to make me look guilty. I broke down, begging my fiancé to believe me, but he just shook his head and walked out. After everyone left, my mom slapped me and told me to leave the house. I was stunned. She didn't even give me a chance to gather my things before throwing everything out. Within a day, I was homeless and single. My entire world had crumbled because of Nikki's lies. For weeks, I tried to win back my fiancé and family, but they refused to listen. The final blow came at Christmas. I went to my parents' house to reconcile, only to discover through social media that they were out of state, celebrating with my fiancé and his family. I saw pictures of them all smiling and happy, while I was left to cry alone. I decided to block them all and even returned my engagement ring. A friend helped me find a job at a restaurant a few hours away, where I could also live cheaply. It was a small apartment and I worked long hours, but I managed to save money. Now, 2 years later, I've moved to a better condo, still working as an assistant manager at the same restaurant. I hadn't spoken to my family since then until one day there was a knock at my door. It was my ex-fiancé. I was shocked and old feelings rushed back. But before I could slam the door, he stopped me and asked to explain. He told me that Nikki had confessed. She had lied about everything after she got married and realized the damage she caused. He said my family had been trying to contact me and wanted to reconcile. But I told him I needed time. While I can never forgive Nikki, it's hard because the rest of my family didn't know she was lying. Still, I feel abandoned, and I'm not sure if I can let them back into my life. My brother-in-law Lucas lost his house not long after his divorce, which happened around 10 months back. A couple of months ago he moved in with us, bringing along his twin daughters Mia and Lily, who are 18. My wife, their sister, and I have a 16-year-old daughter, Chloe. While Chloe and her cousins aren't particularly close, they get along decently enough. However, Mia and Lily have shown absolutely no regard for Chloe's personal space. They would often barge into her room and take whatever they liked. Makeup, phone accessories, clothes, even her school laptop. Chloe complained frequently, and I've already spoken to the twins, asking them to respect her privacy and stop taking things without permission. Unfortunately, both my wife and Lucas didn't see the big deal. They brushed it off as typical teenage behavior, saying, "They're girls. That's just how it is." I didn't share that view. The final straw came when Chloe purchased a $60 MAC makeup set, one she'd saved up for over a month. One of the girls, Lily, took it without asking and ruined it by mixing all the shades together. I'm no expert on makeup, but Chloe was heartbroken when she found the mess on her bed, and she cried about it. I told my wife, and she said she'd ask Lily to apologize. But when I found out Chloe had started taking her valuable things out of the house to protect them, I went ahead and got her a lock for her door. When Lucas and his daughters noticed the lock, they weren't pleased, to say the least. The twins were especially furious. Lucas confronted me about it, and I didn't mince words. He defended his daughters, claiming they weren't thieves and that it's perfectly normal for girls their age to borrow each other's stuff. He went so far as to suggest that Chloe could easily replace the makeup kit with a $15 version from Walmart, and shouldn't be using adult makeup in the first place. He even hinted that my wife should address this flaw in Chloe's personality, accusing me of coddling her. I told him that this was a matter between me and my wife. But then she scolded me for putting a lock on Chloe's door, saying it was unfair to block her cousins from bonding with her. She insisted I should treat them like my own daughters and demanded I take the lock off. I refused, saying the lock stays until her brother and his daughters move out. That's when she got really angry, accusing me of implying they should be kicked out. She warned that her family would despise me for it. I reminded her that I was the one who had allowed Lucas and his girls to stay with us, something her own family refused to do. If it weren't for their unwillingness to step up, we wouldn't be dealing with this chaos in our home. Now, everyone is giving Chloe and me the cold shoulder, and my wife is still upset with me over the whole situation. My ex-fiancé, male 26, cheated on me while I was about 6 months pregnant, female 27. At the time, I was working as a manager at a restaurant and had taken a week off to visit my family in Europe, where I grew up. It was my first trip back since the pregnancy, and I knew it would be my last chance to fly before the baby arrived. When I returned, I found a facial scrub in our shower that wasn't mine. Immediately, I panicked. I confronted him, asking what was going on, but he lied straight to my face. He acted like I was overreacting, saying, "I have no idea how that got there, maybe it's yours." His response infuriated me. I cried at work the whole day. Later that night I brought it up again, and he started shouting about how I didn't trust him. And there I was, pregnant and vulnerable, and he was twisting it to make it seem like I was the one at fault. I tried to push it out of my mind, deciding to focus on my pregnancy instead of wasting energy arguing with someone who wouldn't admit the truth. Deep down, I knew he had been unfaithful, but I told myself it wasn't worth fighting over if he wasn't going to own up to it. A month after giving birth, I got into a car accident. Thankfully, I wasn't injured, but my car was totaled. That incident forced me to make a big choice. Should I spend a fortune on a new car, or should I pack up, leave him and return to Europe with my son? For some reason, owning a car made me feel tied down to the US. It was like, if I buy this car, I'm committing to staying here and moving forward. About a week later, he came home from work and I sat him down. I told him, I'm not spending thousands on a car unless you admit you slept with someone else in our home. I'd rather sell everything and leave. He was stunned. He thought I had dropped it, but at that moment he finally confessed. It was even more heartbreaking because during my pregnancy, I had a fragile cervix, which led to bleeding during intercourse. We had to rush to the ER twice and I dealt with awful nausea the entire time. Naturally, my sex drive was pretty low, but I still tried. I wasn't about to jeopardize my baby's health just to keep him satisfied. Honestly, he could have just taken care of himself rather than betray me like that in our home. 3 months later, I packed my things and flew back to Europe, where I've been happily raising my son as a single mother ever since. It's the best decision I ever made. I'm incredibly proud of myself for walking away. I know I deserve better than someone who would hurt me so deeply when I needed him most. Sure, he's the father of my child, and I won't stand in the way of their relationship, but I'm so glad I left him. He gave me the most precious gift, my son, but he completely lost my respect. Sister always steals my food. I make a fool of myself on her graduation to stop her. Growing up in a family of 6, my parents, my older sister and brother, my younger brother, and me, there was always a bit of chaos. To encourage good behavior, our parents would sometimes treat us to our favorite candy for road trips. Now, I've never been one to share freely. Don't get me wrong, my parents tried hard to instill generosity in us, often making me share even when I didn't feel like it. The problem was my sister. She'd act like she didn't want candy when my parents offered to buy her some. But once we were in the car, she'd start helping herself to everyone else's stash. It drove me crazy. Candy was a rare treat in our house. Mom wasn't a fan of sugary stuff, so when I had a bag of Sour Patch watermelon, I wanted to savor every piece. What made it worse was that my parents always gave her the chance to get her own, but she'd refuse, knowing she could just mooch off the rest of us. Eventually, I started saying no when she asked for my candy, but that didn't sit well with Mom, who would insist I share, calling me selfish if I didn't. There was one time I even tried to put my foot down at CVS. Sister, I said, I'm not giving you any of my candy, so if you want some, buy your own now. She waved it off with her usual, I don't want a whole bag. Yet, sure enough, 20 minutes into the drive, Dad was taking a piece of my candy to give to her while I seethed. This pattern repeated for years, my whole childhood really. No matter what I did, hiding my candy, keeping it out of reach, a parent would step in and I'd have to give up some. Fast forward to her college graduation. By now she's 22, and I'm in my final year of high school. We're at this fancy restaurant after the ceremony, celebrating with family and a few of her friends, including her boyfriend, whom I'm meeting for the first time. There's a good number of people present, enough to make what follows particularly mortifying for everyone involved. After we finish the main meal, my mom offers dessert to anyone who wants it. My brothers, my dad, and I all order something, and I go for the vanilla bean cheesecake with this elaborate sugar sculpture on top. Mom keeps offering my sister dessert, but she insists she's too full and turns it down repeatedly. The desserts arrive, and mine in particular draws attention. I'm seated at the head of the table so everyone can see it. This large, beautiful slice of cheesecake with a huge, intricate sugar nest on top, like something out of a high-end pâtisserie. The dessert itself was impressive, but it was the sugar decoration that really made it a spectacle. Just as the plates are set down, my sister says, I'll just have a bite of everyone's. And that was it for me. Years of frustration bubbled up all at once. Now, the logical thing would have been to offer her a bite. I mean, it was her big day, and the slice was large enough to share. But for me, this had become about something bigger, a matter of principle. Without hesitation, I grabbed the cheesecake and crammed the entire thing into my mouth, crushing the delicate sugar nest in the process. Crumbs scattered everywhere as I stuffed my face in front of my whole family and her friends, people I'd never met before. My sister looked horrified and asked, "Did you seriously do that just so I wouldn't get any?" With my cheeks puffed out, looking like a chipmunk with cheesecake and graham crust all over my face, I nodded without a word. The silence that followed was thick, both at the table and during the uncomfortable ride home. But from that day forward, she never asked for my food again.